Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Robert Swartwood. Thank you for hanging out tonight with our special guest, who is the New York Times bestselling author of 8 novels, including the recent books, The Only One Left and The House Across the Lake. His novels have been published in more than 30 countries. His latest book, Middle of the Night, will be published this June from Dutton Books, a native of Pennsylvania. He now lives in Princeton, New Jersey. That's right. It's your favorite writer and mine, Riley Sager. Riley, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I don't think I've ever been called someone's favorite writer like before.
Well,
People would disagree with
I,
you there, I think.
I mean, not to burst your bubble. That's the intro for everybody. So, but you are,
Oh,
you,
yeah,
you are our
okay,
favorite
great.
author. I mean, definitely. Come on.
I feel so
So,
special now.
so thanks for hanging out. And
No
again,
problem.
for people who are watching this on YouTube, this was supposed to be live on Facebook. The gremlins in Facebook are not letting me stream this live for whatever reason. So we do apologize for anybody who really kind of added it to their calendar to tune in. So, but Riley, thank you for at least bearing with me as we kind of pushed on to do it this way. Anyway, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here was because, in many ways, I almost yeah, inspiration sounds really corny, but well, first of all, okay, let's jump back. I think it was 2 years ago you were on tour for the House Across the Lake.
Yes.
You were at my local independent bookstore, Midtown Scholar, and I waited in line with a book of yours that's not under your current name right now because I thought it would be kind of funny and be kind of cool to give it to you, which of course is this book, which is called Death Notice, which we're going to get to. But I told you, like in a weird roundabout way, I had to thank you because if it wasn't for you, because okay, so I'm a writer as well, mostly under my own name, just more action thrillers, crime thrillers, that type of stuff. But I had written a psychological suspense book, which we can get into because I think in the end it's all kind of the same. They're all thrillers, but it's how it's
They
marketed.
are, yeah.
And basically, I said if it wasn't for you, I would have more than likely have gone with some like initials as my pen name. But I realized, oh, okay, Riley Sager, I could do a more of a gender neutral pen name, and then of course I have Avery Bishop. So again, if it wasn't for you, I my pen name would be KH something. I have no idea.
Well,
So
fun fact, I originally
yeah,
was going to do initials.
well, we're
Like
gonna
I
get into
was
that. We're going to
okay,
get into that
okay.
because I
I
want to
jumped the gun
I
there.
want to go back to very young, and this is not, I don't think, a state secret, because if you look into any of your Riley Sager books on the copyright page, if you dig in, most readers probably don't even know this, but if you dig in here, the copyright is to Todd Ritter. Now that's not an LLC name, that is your actual name.
That is my
So
real true birth name. Yes.
your real true birth name. And so your very first novel published was this novel, Death
Yes.
Notice, Todd Ritter. And as the first book of 3 books, at least of a series, and we're going to get into that. So I want to though talk about first young Todd Ritter. At what like do you remember at what age or what happened to you when you really kind of got that bug, when you felt like, oh, this is something that I want to do. I want to be a writer.
It was sixth grade. And I remember this because we had been asked to write a Christmas short story for like English class, like just like this 1 or 2 page thing, and then read them aloud. And mine got a laugh. Like my class loved my story, which was wonderful because they didn't necessarily love me. And so I was like, oh, hey, people will like me if I write stuff that they enjoy. And that like it was a really good feeling to be like, I created this thing that other people are responding to. And so that started me thinking at a very young age, maybe I will grow up to be a writer. Not knowing just how difficult it is to do that. But that was the beginning, it was sixth grade.
And at that point, uh, did you decide what type of writer you wanted to be? And the reason I say type of writer is, like, for me, that's funny. In sixth grade was the inspiration for me was the movie Jurassic Park. The very first Jurassic Park movie came out in sixth grade, where when I was in sixth grade. And so I started reading everything Michael Crichton had written, even under his pseudonyms. And then in eighth grade, I read my very first Stephen King novel, Insomnia, and that was when I was like, oh, I want, this is what I want to do. And so because of that, I did more, horror. Like a lot of my earlier stuff was more horror, supernatural, and then I kind of got away from that. So at the very beginning, what like did you have an idea of like, okay, I want to be, a mystery writer, a crime writer, a horror writer, science fiction?
Not necessarily. I was introduced at a very impressionable age to Alfred Hitchcock. And so movies like Rear Window and like Vertigo blew my mind because I'm going to spoil Vertigo. Like it's not a happy ending. It's a shocker of an ending. And I had never experienced that before. Like I grew up with, Disney and I still love Disney movies to this day. But like Hitchcock just was like, "Oh wow, this is cool. This is different. This is sinister." I liked being on the edge of my seat. And so like I started to seek out these like horror classics like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist and Halloween. And so I really did have an affinity for just the macabre and the scary and the suspense. And so when I decided, hey, I'm going to give it a go at writing, that's naturally what I gravitated toward.
And so did you dabble with short stories at all? As far as I know that you've only really published novels, but I mean, did you publish any shorts or not publish, but did you write any short stories or did you just dove headfirst into writing a novel?
I wrote a couple short stories, enough to know that I suck at short stories. Like there is a skill to short story writing that I do not possess. Like I just can't do it. Where I'm like, oh, novel, I know how to do that. A 15-page short story, clueless, just no idea.
And so we mentioned, and I showed it already, Death Notice, which was your very first novel. Now, is this your first published novel, or was this your like the actual first novel that you wrote and
It was the
published?
third novel I wrote, the first to be published. The other two are lost on a floppy disk in a landfill somewhere where they
And
rightfully should stay.
so then that's for the best. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about those first two novels? Like, just generally what were they about? Do you just any kind of quick pitch?
No, it's
No,
just
okay. It's
it's too
okay.
humiliating.
It's all right. All right. So anyway, okay. So I keep bringing it up here because of this striking cover that we have here.
This
Um,
is why I have a pen name right there. I blame the cover. The
no, I
cover
will
is
say the next two books in the series were much better covers, but this
they did, but
definitely.
by then the damage had been done. I mean,
Yes, unfortunately, sometimes right out of the gate, a cover really, and a lot of people will say, "Oh, sometimes a cover doesn't matter," but no, you really should judge a book by its cover. And so, unfortunately, the publisher didn't really do you any favors with this cover. But this was your
not
first
at
novel,
all.
so it was obviously very exciting for you. Can you tell? Do you remember kind of like the inspiration about how this one came about?
Yeah,
And before you do, just note that I found on the Amazon page I guess you had written the inspiration. So I'm curious to see, over a decade now later, how close things are going to be from your memory and then, what you had there.
I bet it's I remember it well. I was working in newspapers at the time, and one of my duties was to like sort of copy edit and read the obituaries. And or was the coffin for like because on one day on the police scanner, and I forget which one came first, but one day on the police scanner, playing in the newsroom, there was a report of a literal coffin sitting on the side of the road. Like it fell off something, I don't know, like a coffin truck, but there was a coffin on the side of the highway, and some poor cop had to go out there and open it and see if there was like someone inside. And I just thought, oh my God, that would be an amazing opening scene for a book. And in this case, there would be a person inside. And yeah, that's a really cool idea. And then around the same time, I was editing obituaries and there was a typo which got the person's date of death wrong. And so it said that they had like died the next day. And Like that basically they died tomorrow, basically, from the day I was reading it. And I'm like, oh my God, someone is sending obituaries warning that he's going to kill these people before he kills them. And then he puts them in a coffin on the side of the road. And like that got my imagination spinning. And so that was sort of like the plot of Death Notice, where it's a small town police officer. Um, she one day finds a coffin on the side of the road and there is a person in it and he is dead and murdered. And it turns out that his obituary had been sent to the local newspaper by the killer hours
Yeah,
before.
no, it's a great idea, and like I said, and I was telling you before we started that I read this recently. It's a really fun book. Did so? Yeah, so it was the police chief, Cat Campbell.
Yes,
Now, when you initially thought of these characters, was this going to be just a standalone, or did you have it in your head? I mean, I guess like when you sold it, well, was it sold as maybe like a two-book deal where
it
they
was a
thought that
two-book
this was going to
deal
be a
as a
first book and
series.
you were going to do a second book?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when you initially wrote this, did you feel that there was potential to do a series, or was it just I just want to write this book, and of course it's left open like most series are to continue?
There was definitely I intended it as a series. Like back then when I first wrote it, I wrote it. God, when was the first draft? Oh, 2007 was the first draft, and that was everything was a series. Like pretty much like every big mystery novel was part of a series, and it really wasn't until like Gone Girl came along that everyone decided to love standalones. So I was working under like the series mode. I wanted to write a long running mystery series of books, and I got three. So that was three and
So
done.
so again, I've only read the book one because honestly, I mean, the first two books are out of print. The third one, it looks like at least the Kindle edition is at least still on, is showing up
Really, I'm
on Amazon.
shocked by that. Yeah.
Maybe you should have your agent look into this. I don't know. But yeah, so the next two books were Bad Moon and Devil's Night. Um, so with book one, did you already have I mean, kind of in your head what you want to do with book two and book three? And they are listed as Kate Campbell series. So there are several different characters that appear in this one. Again, I've not read the other books. But do did you know from the beginning that it was going to be a Cat Campbell focused on series, or were some of the
Yeah,
other
she was.
characters in this one, like there was the state police guy, Kyle, I believe, was that his
I
name?
forget his name. I Nick. It
But
was
does he
Nick.
show up in? I mean, like, or do
He
so do
Yeah,
some of these
he's in the
characters then?
others. But yeah,
Okay,
there's it was yeah, some of them come and go. Like Henry, the obituary writer in the first one, isn't in the second one, but he shows up in the third one. And so like it was I was really kind of not knowing what I was doing and kind of flying by the seat of my pants and just trying my best. And yeah, I think it's okay that they're out of print,
yeah.
basically, is
So,
my thought.
but do you remember how much research you did or did not do for this book? And the only reason I mention it is because there was a scene where basically it deals with embalming. And it was a long
Mm-hmm.
chapter, very detailed, which in the back of my head, especially as a writer, I'm thinking like, okay, you did a lot of research for this because again, it was very, very detailed.
Um, Google is your friend, even when it's about embalming. Like that was one of the things where I did worry for a time. Where I'm like, are people going to show up at my door? Are the police going to come because of what I am Googling about? Like, how do you obtain, formaldehyde? How do you get in large amounts? And how do you like? It was very eye opening, and it was fun. Like I enjoyed doing the research for it, but I didn't go overboard. Like I didn't go to the local morgue or like funeral parlor and be like, hey, can I watch?
Yeah, right. You didn't want to shadow somebody.
Then the police definitely would have arrived. Yeah.
So okay, well actually let's jump back a little bit. So yeah, so you by trade you're a reporter. That is what you went to school for. Is that correct?
No, I went to
Oh,
college. I was a film studies major.
Oh,
in college, and it was a
because of
wonderful.
Hitchcock.
That was the Hitchcock. Yeah,
Okay.
it was great. We watched movies and then we wrote papers about the movies and then we talked about the movies. It prepared me for nothing in the real nothing. Although there was one class that later, like it, when I took it, I didn't realize it at the time, but it did change the way I think because it was a class called film and literature. And I thought, oh, we're going to read the book, then watch the movie, and then write a paper. And instead, it was about narrative. How are these stories told? Why are they told this way? What is the effect of being told in this way? And we looked at both film and short stories and novels and really got into the nitty gritty of how narratives are formed and why they are the way they are. And so every time now I sit down and write a book, I think about all the things I learned in that class and I still apply it today. Like, why am I telling this story the way I'm telling it? What's the best way to explore this narrative?
So so then you graduate college and you
Yes,
have this degree that you can't really do anything with.
I got a job at
How
a
do you
newspaper.
Okay, so you got a job in a newspaper.
Yes.
And then what were you doing at the newspaper? You had mentioned before about you were reviewing the obituaries, but I mean, were you a like straight up reporter or
No, I was a copy editor and page designer who did some reporting on the side.
okay.
Like my early, and I'm dating myself very much here. My second week at my first newspaper job, it was a Saturday night, and Princess Diana died in a car crash. And there were no more reporters left in the newsroom, so they sent the newbie on the copy desk out to get quotes from people. And so I didn't know the area. I was in a state. I was in a new place. I didn't know where I was going. I like went to TGI Fridays, went to the bar, and just went to like the first person I saw and said, "Tell me how you feel about Princess Diana's death." And this woman went, "Princess Diana died?" I was like, "Yeah, she was killed in a car accident." And then the woman started to weep openly in front of me. And I was like, "Oh shit. I'm not prepared for this." And I'm like, sort of like, there. It's okay. Can I have a quote? Because I need to call into my editor right now. And it was so weird. I was just like thrown into the fire.
So so you do that work and you've been, I guess, kind of moonlighting then as a writer. You have that idea, the inspiration for what became Death Notice. Now, was the title always going to be Death Notice? And that's a thing that some readers might not know, that sometimes, a writer will have a working, well, what we call a working title, and then ultimately it gets changed for one reason or another. Maybe the publisher doesn't think it's as marketable, or maybe there's something similar that's already on the market. So with Death Notice, was that something that you had that title from the beginning, or?
Yes. All three of those first books in that series, they let me keep the working titles. Ironically, it's not until I hit the bestseller list that now my titles are very, very market focused and, like group think and just, yeah, it's marketing has a lot to do now with my titles.
You got to get those keywords, baby. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
like of my books, I think literally Final Girls of the Riley Sager books, Final Girls and The House Across the Lake, I think are the only ones that retained their working titles.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely going to be into Final Girls shortly, but I feel like there was one other thing I wanted to ask you about this, and I'm completely blanking right now. Well, did you have an idea for a book for? I mean, like, say, these, and we're going to obviously the reason you became Riley Sager, and we're going to get into some other things, is just because these did not sell maybe as much as well as you would have hoped. And usually that's the
A
story of
cover
every
like
writer's
that, not
life.
selling, go figure.
Yeah, but say they did take off. I mean, say that there was an audience for it. Like, did you already have in the back of your head, like, oh, I have maybe like three other potential books already kind of lined up, or stories,
I
or
had
were
I
you
had
basically
like a
glad when
five
it was like, okay, three is done, and I'm out?
I had 5 books in mind planned, and then I was going to do a standalone. After 3, it became clear that I didn't have any support from the publisher and I didn't have any sales, and that to write a fourth and fifth book in the series would have just been a complete waste of my time. Like you just knew. I knew enough. Like I didn't know much about publishing at that point, but I knew enough to be like, this continuing this is a fool's errand.
Right.
So I decided to
Which
stop.
which leads us to your first pen name. I can tell by your expression that this is not going to be good. Um, would you like me to continue, Riley? Are we good?
We can.
I feel like we're in therapy right now.
It's long story short.
Okay.
I decided to do a new direction.
Yes.
And so I wrote, it's a historical supernatural mystery that takes place in Philadelphia after the Civil War. And it involves mediums. And I loved writing it. I loved the research. I loved being in that historical world. I became like this true expert on like 1869 Philadelphia. It was such a great experience. And I thought the result is a wonderful book. I sent it to my agent, and this will come up a lot. You've encountered this as well, and we talked about like beforehand. Other authors have encountered it too, where my agent said, "I like this book. I think you found your niche here. I think you should use a pen name because editors are going to look at your previous sales, which are abysmal, and they will not probably not make an offer. Or if they do make an offer, it will be on a par with what your earlier books earned, which was nothing." And so I was like, yeah, sure, let's do that. And then the nightmare began.
Well, okay. Well, before we get to the nightmare, for people who are not aware, I want the least of them to see. This is the book. It was a paperback original that was
It's out
put
of
out
print.
by a gallery. It was called Things Half in Shadow. Now, the name you have here is Alan Finn. Very close. You should have added a middle initial J there. It was very close.
Mm.
So, but I mean, how
Alan is
did
my
the yeah? How did this?
Alan is my middle name.
Okay.
And Finn, I thought was a nice nod to the time period because of Huck Finn and Mark
Okay.
Twain.
So now, obviously, this, and you mentioned you kind of already did the setup about what type of book this was, completely different from the Cat Campbell mystery series. So, before we dig in a little bit more about this, was the writing process like how different was the writing process between this and then this and books 2 and 3? I mean, did you find? I guess I've seen interviews with you before, and I know you talk about this, and I'm completely blanking right now. For people who are unaware of it, like, can you just kind of really tell us quick, like are you someone who has to outline the entire book, or do you sit down with just the general idea in mind and kind of let the story go where it is? Is it more of maybe a hybrid of that? And has that has that evolved in any way from this book to the only one left?
Yeah, it has. I used to outline everything, like start to finish. Chapter one, this has to happen. Chapter two, this has to happen, all the way to the very end. And then I would adjust until I get like, okay, this is a good backbone to start writing the book. And then in the writing of it, I would also adjust because things change. But I was very much an outliner. That lasted all the way up until, gosh, well into my Riley Sager career. But then eventually I started to realize I was sometimes just sticking to the outline so fervently, even though the outline was bad. And so, like, I never veered when I should have, or until it was too late, and then I had to do a lot of rewriting. And so I decided to now I just kind of do it's all in my head. I'll jot down notes. If I get really stuck, what I do now is do index cards and just like lay them out on the floor and sort of like almost storyboard the structure of the book on the floor. And it's always an evolving process for me. So I don't outline as much as I used to do in the past.
Have you found yourself um, becoming a faster writer, or like when you were doing Death Notice, or even the books you were doing before? Because again, for people who aren't writers, it you can use the old adage that it's like riding a bike. I mean, the more, or like running a marathon, the more you do it, the more you practice, the easier, well, I don't say the easier it becomes, but the more conditioned you become to being used to, like, I mean, because it's work. I mean,
It
it's a
is.
job. You are working, and I mean, it's not necessarily a 9 to 5 job, because you're probably working more hours than that, but because you're thinking about it all the time. I mean, it's probably, the story ideas. I mean, even when you're out in social functions, you're probably just thinking out about you, but like I'm constantly like thinking about, like, oh, like, how am I going to get a character out of this jam, or like, what am I going to do next? And then, and then, I mean, and I don't know about you, because I'm going through a copy editing phase right now. Like, copy editing to take, I like it, but it takes forever, like, so I mean, so it is a lot of work. It's always funny when some people are like, "Oh, I love writing. It's great. It's easy." And it's like, "What are you talking about? It's awful." It's
It,
you
it
know it.
Whoever coined the phrase, like there's the phrase like I hate writing, but I love having written.
Yes, yes.
I am that person where it's like it's so hard to just do the grind and get the words on the page. Once the words are on the page, then it's like this is fun. I get to make this thing better. But it's the getting all of those words on the page first is sometimes it can be brutal. And
So,
every
at
book
what?
is different.
Yeah, what book did you, or for me, I don't. I can't even pinpoint the time, but I found that my first drafts, it got easier to do a first draft when I accepted the fact that first drafts inevitably always suck. Like, it doesn't matter how much time you spend. So I've started kind of doing the more Nora Roberts vomit drafts,
Mhm.
process, where I just want to get that first draft out as soon as possible, let the story go where it goes, let the characters do what they do, and then go back and clean it up or whatever else. Like, what is your process in terms of the first draft? Are you, do you, because like some writers, like they'll try to do like a page a day, or like a chapter a day, a certain word count a day. And then, before they start writing, they might go back to what they wrote the previous day and maybe clean that up. I mean, what do you find yourself doing there?
I always tell myself, you're not going to look at what you wrote. You're not going to go back. That's the past. Keep moving forward. I always inevitably go back and look at what what came before it. And so it's I try to be very efficient with the writing. I mean, I am on a book a year schedule, which I don't have as much time as some other authors do to waste isn't the right word, but to experiment, I guess, is a better word. Like I need to kind of hit the ground running and get that first draft as clean as possible and as good as possible because there have been instances very recently where that first draft is done. I hand it to my editor, and then there's the wonderful news of, oh, there are huge problems and you need to like redo a lot of it. And so for me, it's just trying to be the most efficient writer as I can possibly be.
How long does it, I mean, do you typically try to write every day, or is it more of like just a Monday through Friday type thing? So many words, per session, or do you maybe, write throughout the day? I've known some writers who will sit down, for an hour or two, write something out, go, do something, come back to it. I mean, what's your typical writing schedule like? Or,
It really depends on the time of year. I generally start a book January 2nd, and I use a tool called Pacemaker that is very helpful. You can create a word count calendar, basically. And so you can say, okay, I'm starting here. I wanted it to be done on this date. These are the dates where I otherwise engaged. How many words do I need to write per day? And it will tell you. And you can even adjust it. So, like when I start out, I like to start very, very small because I'm still feeling my way into the story. And so it's nice to be like, I will just write 100 words today on this first day, and then try to, you know, learn more about what I'm doing here. And so like it builds up. And so by the end, when you see that light at the end of the tunnel, I'm doing like 2,000, 3,000 words a day, just scrambling to get the book done.
I want to go back to Things Half in Shadow. Now this is a thick book. I'm trying to look here
It's
on
a lot. It's a
Kobo.
big ass book.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm looking here on Kobo. If people aren't aware, Kobo has this really cool thing where they actually show you the total word count for almost all books that is on Kobo. So it looks like here total word count is saying 133,000 words. That's a big ass
I actually
book.
I actually thought it was a little bit longer. I thought it was like 140 something, but
Well,
yeah, it was
I
a it
mean,
was
it's
a
definitely over 100,000, which 100,000 is, I mean, it's, even page counts. I mean, it's over 400 pages. So, I mean, this is a very, very long book. When you start a project, do you have in the back of your head an idea of like, okay, this is probably going to be, 80,000 word novel, 100,000 word novel, or is it one of those things where you never really know and you're really surprised by the outcome?
I've stopped thinking about it because I have both Middle of the Night and The Only One Left, especially The Only One Left, was one of those books where I'm like, okay, 90,000 words. I got to 95,000 words and I still had a lot of story left to tell. And so I'm like, okay, so it's gonna be 100,000 words. And then just and it's like I think it ended up being like 110,000 words. But it was ridiculous where I'm like, this book is not ending. Like I just had still so much story to get through. And so now I try not to guesstimate how long it's going to be. It's as long as it's going to be.
That's the perfect,
And if
yeah,
it's
the book
again, if
should
it's
always.
over 100,000, maybe I can take some things out, but never again will I do like 130,000 word book.
Yeah. No, I mean the book definitely should always be as long as it needs to be. Um, but uh well let's hold on. I'm completely blanking right now. I know I had something very smart and intelligent to say, and now I'm completely blanking on what it was. Um, but the so let's talk about a little bit about this. Is there anything you want to say about this book?
It was the worst writing experience, the worst publishing experience of my life.
Hmm.
Um, and it happens, I
Happens
guess.
all the time. It
But
happens
this
all the time.
was I mean they bought it for more money than I paid for other books. So I thought, oh, they're going to do something with this book. Things happened. There were a lot of edits involved, a lot of edits that I wasn't quite willing to do, but I did them anyway. Like the book just fundamentally changed during the editing process to the point where I was thinking, why did you acquire this book?
Hmm.
And it ended up being dumped on like the second to last day of the year. No publicity, no anything. It was basically, I believe, like a tax write-off for a tax loss for the publisher. And it was horrible because I put my heart and soul into it. And it was a very brutal experience.
Yeah. And
And I wrote a
unfortunately that
sequel that will never see the light of day. So that's another thing where like,
you
yeah,
actually have a full manuscript sequel to this book?
yes, I do somewhere. Yeah.
Oh. So were you contracted just for one book or two books?
Just for one book, but I was like, oh, they'll want a second one. So I spent a year writing the second one and they did
Yeah.
not want it. It was it was bad. It was truly, I do not wish this publishing experience on anyone. And so we should
Unfortunately, you
probably
probably
stop
the same.
talking about it now.
Unfortunately, probably the experience you have is what many writers have had. Yeah, no, I
But
mean, publishing is a fickle business, and there's no. I remember, I think it was Stuart O'Nan had once told me, or someone had said, like the only certain thing in publishing is the advance.
mhm,
Publishers can come to you, they can make all these promises, say they're going to do all these things. When it really comes down to it, the only thing that's certain is whatever they're going to pay you, and then that's it, because they're contracted for that. They can't, you can't guarantee. I mean, God, I remember seeing one writer saying they had a book that was scheduled to come out like the first week of September, 2001, and then the book comes, and then of course 9/11 happens, and then
Right.
I mean, just sometimes things just happen that are completely beyond, or just for whatever reason. So anyway, okay, so this book is out there. You're very proud of it. So anybody, if you can, go check it out. I haven't
Oh,
had a chance to read this yet.
I don't think it can be found literally anywhere anymore. So I mean,
Yeah. Well, it is on
it's
Kobo, so at least it looks like the ebook editions are still up.
it was a heartbreaking experience, but the silver lining is that Riley Sager was born and out of the
Yeah.
ashes.
So
And
so
so
when did you so during this process, so you sold this book, they end
can you
they
stop
end up
putting
like
that up in
dumping it.
take it
Yeah.
out of the
Okay.
frame?
Sorry. Here.
Much
Is this one
better.
better? Okay. Much better.
Yes.
So, and I remember what my question was now. For your Dutton books for Riley Sager, are you contracted at all for a certain word count? Because I know that sometimes certain contracts or certain publishers really want to hit a certain, word count, or is it kind of they don't really
It's
worry
it's
about
in
that?
there,
Yeah.
but it's not like if I go over 5,000 words, they're going to be like, no. Like
Right. Okay.
they trust me to hand in something that's
Because I think
roughly
the shortest one was Survive the Night, right? I mean, that one's like 80,000 or
that
something.
short. Yes, that
Okay.
was my pandemic book.
Yeah.
It was, I started writing it in March of 2020. The world was on fire with COVID. And I just feel proud that I managed to write a book at all, like that I could push aside the anxiety of everything and just finish a book, even though it was short.
Yeah. Well, okay, so yeah, let's get then to the creation of Riley Sager. So you
Yes.
have this book. I'm not going to hold it up, but you had this book that came out, and at what point in that publication? Because again, you had already gone through, with Todd Ritter, with that publisher, you probably already got a sense like, okay, this is kind of deja vu. What's going on here? At what point did you realize I'm gonna have to make another change?
Oh, before that one even came out, because they had already said, yeah, we're not interested in a sequel. And we have like, so the writing was on the wall. I'm like, okay, this is a one and done. This is going to break my heart. And it did. And I was pretty much done with publishing. Like it had not been like it had been a dream of mine to be published, and it was the opposite. Like pretty much all of the experience was bad. And I remember talking to my agent, and she said, I just want you to have one good publishing experience. And I was really ready to just, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I was like, I can't keep doing this. I will give it one more try. Here is a one-page synopsis for a book that I have in mind that I think I might write. And it was the synopsis for Final Girls. And my agent read it, and it was a really good synopsis. It was a really good one page. My agent read it and said, I know at least five editors who want this book like right now. So write the fucking shit out of it. Her exact words. I will like, always remember, like they're emblazoned on my memory.
And that's part of the acknowledgments where was it? Yeah, thanks are due to my agent whose enthusiasm for Final Girls helped me set a record for speed writing.
Yes,
So do you
nine
remember how
weeks.
fast it took you to write
9
this?
weeks. Yeah.
Oh,
From start to finish, I wrote the first draft in nine nonstop, frantic, just I was at the point where like I literally had nothing to lose. And so it was wonderfully freeing, where it's like I've got nothing to lose. This is my last thing I'm ever going to write, possibly. So let's just throw it all on the page. And um it was very therapeutic and very cathartic, and I just wrote it like in almost a fever dream.
and so we kind of talked before we started recording about how your Riley Sager books, you start to go playing around more with the timelines, more with just kind of the narration. You're adding in different kind of experimental stuff. Um, Final Girls is, I mean, and there's a reason I think you've had different pen names. I mean, again, we have the Todd Ritter, just straight up mystery series. And then you go to the Alan Finn, which again you said is like historic. You know what I mean? And then so at what point, like, where did the idea come from for Final Girls? I mean, do you remember at what point where you had that synopsis? Like, what inspired that?
I was watching Halloween on Halloween. It was it was I had been laid off from my newspaper job and I no longer had a publisher and I was just home alone and filled with pity, self-pity and sadness. And it was Halloween and I was baking a cake that I was going to decorate orange like it was a pumpkin. And I was just watching Halloween on TV. And that's when I was like, hey, what if this was a real thing and that these were real survivors? And I wanted to explore like what happened after the horror movie, like 10 years after the horror movie ends. How much would that experience mess up like these girls? And that's what happened. Yeah, I wrote it very, very quickly. It was sort of
And
like
so
a bolt of inspiration.
yeah. And so for anybody who has read Final Girls, which by the way, Stephen King calls the first great thriller of 2015 or I'm sorry, 2017. So, some guy named Stephen King. It was no big deal.
Some guy, I'm not
Um,
familiar.
Now for people who have read that book, it is one of these kind of dual timeline books that are very similar in this genre. And was this the very first time you did something like that? I mean, like was it natural, or or did you find it too challenging because the way you're bouncing back and forth in time? And was that something where you felt like that had to almost kind of be outlined? Because I think you said before that you were you outlining at that point still?
I did outline this one. Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Okay.
It just felt natural to me that in order to sort of examine how this massacre affected this final girl, that we needed to see the events leading up to that massacre. And so I envisioned it as this is her present day narrative, but interspersed is going to be almost like the horror movie. So like that what was going on now was like the sequel to a horror movie that we had not seen yet was how I thought about it as I was writing it. And
Um,
it turned
and
out I
it's a
was
great,
very good at it. Like that
yeah,
was,
no, I mean,
I don't claim to be very good at many things, but that dual timeline structure and the first person narration, I was like, yeah, I'm good at this.
no, it's a great book. I forget when I first read it, but it's one of those books that because I don't know about you, like I read a lot of books and I enjoy a lot of books, but some of the books, you asked me a couple months later, a year later, I couldn't tell you anything that happened in that book. In Final Girls, I remember a lot of different scenes, a lot of the different plot points throughout. I mean, it's one of those books that definitely has stayed with me. So definitely, I put it up there with definitely being for sure one of the great thrillers of 2017. Um, so, okay, so you write this book. Your agent was very enthusiastic, which is always a great sign for
Yes.
the agent to be enthusiastic. And then they shop it. Okay, so you had the same conversation where she was
I,
like,
I'm more, pretty much, I wanted to put my real name on this book. I was so proud of this book that I want everyone to know that I wrote this book. And my agent, in her wisdom, sort of we had the talk again, and she said, "Listen, you can put your name on this book by all means if that's what you want. But again, every editor I send it to is going to look up your previous sales." And and this is where she gets like with the salty language again, which she's so demure and she's so sweet. And so like the only two like big anecdotes I have about her is like she's cursing like a sailor. But she said like, you know, every editor will look at your past sales and if they even make an offer, it's going to be a shitty offer. They're going to slap a shitty cover on it. They're going to dump it into the market with no publicity, and you will be exactly where you are now. And this book will die like your others. And I don't think you want that. And to have it presented to me in such stark terms was the moment I knew, like, yeah, I need to do a pen name again.
yeah.
And so I did, and wow, it's the result has been more than I ever dreamed it could be.
No, and that's and I forget who I was speaking with somewhat recently, where I always use your career as this almost inspiration about hustle, like never giving up. I mean, you have just reinvented yourself to the point from from your first couple books, which I know we had talked before, like did not sell. I think you had told me before how many of the first books sold. I mean, it was hardly anything. To you, probably your new. I mean, you're probably selling the same amount of copies in a week of what your first novel was selling for the
Um,
lifetime.
to,
So I
I use this comparison that my best week ever under my real name, I sold 250 copies. None of my books have sold, all of my books have sold more than that, even in their worst weeks, still. So like it's weird. So
yeah.
when I get asked like, oh, you're ever going to write a book under your own name, your real name again? It's like, why would I do that? Like, why would I be so foolish? Like they don't sell. So
Well,
it's yeah,
so
it's been crazy.
yeah, I mean, and the only one left was on the New York Times bestseller list for how many weeks? And
Five.
and and don't okay, because I was gonna be like, don't give me that BS. We're like, oh, I don't know. It's like, of course you know. It's
It was
5 weeks.
5 weeks on New York Times, and it was 19 weeks on the Publishers Weekly bestseller list.
It's
Yeah,
amazing.
it
That
was
is great.
crazy.
So definitely, I mean, you had that hustle. You did not give up, which again was the inspiration of just writing, what you wanted to write, and then now you have these books and you're killing it. What time do we have? I don't want to go too much longer, but
Well, because of the technical difficulties, we can go like to 8:15
yeah,
past.
okay.
Yeah, okay.
Well, okay. So you wrote Final Girls, huge hit. I mean, the publicity. Okay, well, can you talk about then? Okay, I guess where did the pen name come from? I mean,
I was going to do initials. My parents are named Ray and Linda, so I wanted to use their initials to honor them. And Sager is my grandmother's, my mom's maiden name. His last name is Sager, and I just like the sound of that. And so I was going to be R.L. Sager, and I thought it was brilliant. And yeah, it took me like literally 5 seconds. We're like, yeah, R.L. Stein sort of has the market cornered on those initials. And so it really was like I looked up names, and there was Riley, and it was both a popular, like one of the most popular names in the country. And I'm like, it's basically RL, just spelled out. And so that was Riley Sager. Yeah.
and so then
Little
you
did I
shop.
know that I'd like be, have to sign it thousands upon thousands of times.
Well, at least you kept it short. You didn't want to have to
I
write
did,
really
yes, thank
long. So
God.
that's
I feel
cool.
bad for Alex Michaelides when he has to sign like all his books because that's a long name.
I have a long last name. That's why I kind of got more to just the initial type, really quick thing.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were shopping this around, now when the same thing too with the Alan Flynn book, when you were shopping that around, you know, your agent didn't tell anybody. It was like, okay, this is the book, this is the author. Like they wouldn't really get into it. Of course, once I think you get to a certain place, the publisher, has to know. I mean, when you're about ready to sign a contract, but
Yes.
like but like during the actual, and I think you had told me, I think we'd had a conversation before about this, where when you were shopping it around, some of the interested editors were like wanted to have calls, and that's oftentimes what will happen. An editor will want to get on a call with the agent and the writer to discuss the book, or kind of like future books or whatever else, to get a sense of maybe what the author is looking for in terms of a career, future books. And at that point you said that they were just calling you, I mean, they did not know who you were.
Yeah, they did not know. It was completely blind. My agent said, "This is the book. It's a pen name. I will tell you nothing else unless you make an offer."
Yeah.
And so I had calls with four editors who were interested, who at that point did not know my name, and it was very weird to to be having like phone calls with people. And I knew right away, like my editor at Dutton was the first editor I had like the call with, and I knew very early on, I'm like, yeah, this is the place I want to be. And even though I talked to others afterwards and they were wonderful, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I want them. This is the place where I think I belong. And so it went for auction, and thank God they gave the biggest offer. And so I was sweating that because I'm like, oh gosh, what if they come in with the lowest offer? Do I would I still go with them? I don't know. But it felt serendipitous that, you know, the first person I talked to is my editor, became my editor, and is still today my editor.
And she was just, I saw in Publishers Marketplace, she was just promoted, right? I mean, she has a
She
new
was,
position.
because she's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So I wanted to just, I don't want to go, I mean, you have so many of Riley Sager books at this point. I mean, not like 100, but you have a good number. We don't really have time to go through each and every one of them, but I found it interesting for your second book, Last Time I Lied. Um, you have a Taylor Swift epigraph here. Was that, did you have to get permission for that?
Do I have the epigraph for the
Or
last time
no,
I
no,
lied?
it wasn't in this one. It was in
No, it
the
was the
house
house
on
across the lake is the
the
epigraph.
house across the lake.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
That
How
was
did you
because I
get
mean,
away with it? Because I always thought like any type of like lyric is it from a lyric?
yeah. I mean, I asked, they we checked with legal, and I think like it's okay if it's,
Wow, that's
maybe we did
amazing.
have to clear
Okay.
it, and I don't know. Maybe I'm totally breaking the law, and like the Swift police are going to come get me, but no, like it felt appropriate for that book, and also I'm a huge fan, and so like it just
Yeah,
yeah. But
no, absolutely.
the last time I lied is one where I sort of paraphrase a lyric from her, and it was so close that I just like I like thanked her in the acknowledgments just for like, you know, thank you Taylor Swift for letting me basically steal a line from one of your songs and make it as if my character is saying it.
So okay, so with this book, you open and close it in the second person.
Yes.
Are you, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the second person. I've even written a short novel in the second person. Stuart Onan's A Prayer for the Dying is one of my favorite novels written in the second person. And my very first book, or my very first published novel, I did the prologue and epilogue in second person because I don't know, there's something about that voice. I mean, what drew you to the second person for this? Because the rest of the book is in first. Actually, I never, I don't think I read this one yet, but it's all first person, but you have it bookended in second person. So I mean, was that something came after the fact, or you knew going into it, it just felt right? I mean, how did that come about?
Well, there's a third
Oh, is there? Okay.
in the middle where I drop a massive plot twist. And so that was one of the reasons I did it, because it was one of those things that like if it had been narrated in first person, it would have come up by that point. You know, you're always doing these little things like, how
Yeah.
can I withhold information from the reader without
You want to be
cheating?
fair. You want to be fair to the reader. You don't want to cheat the
Right.
reader because there's sometimes you'll read a book where it's like you'll get to the big twist ending and you're like, wait, how's that fair? That's that's not because it's like they just pull it out. It's like no. That's kind of shitty what you just did. Like there's no way. So I
Yes.
I
Like
understand what you're talking about. Okay. So
but I
yeah, but
also
the second person, yeah, go ahead.
it was inspired by there was a Harlan Coben book.
Yep,
Um
The Innocent.
yes, where the first line is, you didn't mean to kill him. And I thought that was such a gripping way to start the book. And that had been just sort of sitting quietly in the back of my mind for years and years and years. And then when I had to start writing The Last Time I Lied, I was like, that might be a good time to like pull out that particular tool and see if it works. And I think it did. It's very effective when used well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I actually, my second Avery Bishop novel, I do the same thing, the prologue and epilogue, which I then after the fact, I found out, I'm like, oh shoot, you did it too in your second book, but it gets because again, I love the second person, and in that one, it's the same thing. I have, there's first person narration, there's some third person, and it just felt right to bookend the book with that second person. But I did get pushback from my editor because she's like, yeah, this reads really well. It's really, but it's like, I don't want someone to open it up and the first thing they see is second person. Cause like some people just, they get turned off by that. I mean, did you have any pushback at all from that?
No, there were other things to worry about with that. It was that was the that was the sort of like sophomore quote sort of, Riley Sager's sophomore, not slump, but it was a whole different writing experience than Final Girls because I wrote the first half while waiting, for Final Girls. Like there was a long, long time lead time between the acceptance of Final Girls and the publication. Like almost, I think it was more than a year and a half. Um, no, it might have been even longer.
Well, and
Yeah, I
that's the
think it was
thing that
longer.
maybe some people aren't aware. Like in terms of publishing, there is a very long lead time. Oftentimes, like a book that you might write and sell to a publisher might not come out for like 2 years because of everything. And so,
Yeah, I think the deal was like December or November of 2015, and the book wasn't published until July of 2017. And so there was a long time in between. And during that time, I'm like, okay, I will put it to good use and write the follow up. So I was halfway done with The Last Time I Lied before um, that man we mentioned earlier, one Mr. Stephen King, like tweeted that he had read Final Girls and called it the first great thriller of 2017. And nothing messes with your head more than knowing that what you are currently writing might possibly be read by Stephen King. And it was just, it really, really got into my mind. And so the second half of that book, the writing of it was torture because I doubted every word of it because I just had it so like, oh my God, Stephen King might read this. People are going to read this and they're going to judge me based on Final Girls. And so it was a very strange reversal of the writing of Final Girls. Final Girls had nothing to lose. With The Last Time I Lied, I had in the mindset, oh, I have so much to lose.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, especially having gone through the auction and, getting a nice size advance, all of a sudden there's this pressure where it's like, oh, I have to, yeah, got got to make it worth it. Well, it's definitely. I mean, you've been killing it. Obviously, all the books have been huge hits. There's always been talk about, you've sold film rights or at least options to all the books so far, correct?
They've all been optioned in some
Yeah,
form or another. And, Hollywood is weird and Hollywood is fickle. And I hope something gets made at some point, but also I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't because there's
yeah,
so much material out there and they're always looking for things. And my books, I tend to write them like they're movies, and no one's making movies anymore. that,
yeah.
and so they're all making like streaming TV shows. So it's very, we'll see. Anytime Hollywood is involved, I'm sort of like take it all with a grain of salt, where it's like, yeah, you can, we'll see.
Well, so again, I mean, congratulations on all the success, especially where, from where you started to where you got to, because publishing is a very, it's a very tough business. Did you ever read that Times article about Cormac McCarthy after he passed away, where it was basically like, a career like Cormac McCarthy's never could have happened nowadays, which is true because his first couple books, like, you know, sold like nothing. I mean, and the publisher just kept like, okay, well, we'll do another one.
Yeah, and it's publishing is very, it's for, it's seen as like a genteel business, and underneath that gentility, it's just cutthroat and brutal. And in order to survive, you do need to learn how to pivot. And one way I pivoted was like with the pen names. And yeah, we won't get into it, but yes, I've gotten a lot of shit for the pen name. And but it was necessary for my survival in the publishing industry.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people understand that, and some people don't. And but there are more people in my situation than you think.
Oh, absolutely. I
I
mean,
yeah.
good books get rejected all the time for one reason or another. Before we had recorded, I was telling you a story about one writer who I think is very well known to a lot of people now, but his first two books that were published, same as you know, publisher didn't really do anything for him. Sales were awful. He writes a book, shops it around, a lot of interest from editors. His agents thinking like, okay, we're gonna have an auction. For people who don't know, an auction is usually when you get like, more than one bid. So it's different publishers are bidding against each other. It's an auction. And ultimately, no one placed an offer just because of his sales, the marketing, because it's no longer now in the past, an editor saw a book, they liked the book, they bought the book. Now it goes through so many different things. There's marketing meetings, there's all these other things and all these other like people that basically, and that's the same thing too with like with my first Avery Bishop book. We had some editors who wanted the book, but ultimately the publisher did not, put in an offer because of for one reason or another, because it was above her head. So that happens all the time. Fortunately for him, it turned out there was one editor who basically really pushed to get the book, made a chance, and now that was his breakout book. I mean, he is a very, very well known. I mean, there
And
was a Hollywood movie based on one of his books, and I mean, but to think that if that one editor did not come through, what would his career be like? And that's the same thing with a lot of writers. I mean,
yeah,
it's a
and
tough business. It's no one ever said it was going to be easy.
the book in question is phenomenal. And his book was also blurred by Stephen King. So there you go.
That's right.
Stephen
That's right.
King, magic
Riley,
maker.
thank you so much for hanging out. I won't take much more of your time, but real quick, what can you tell us about your new one coming out in June?
Yeah, it's called Middle of the Night, and it is coming out on June 18th. And it's about it takes place in my backyard, basically. It's about a guy who moves back home to a suburban New Jersey neighborhood where 30 years earlier his best friend vanished. They were camping in a tent in his backyard. He woke up the next morning, someone had slashed the side of the tent, and his best friend Billy was taken. And he was never found again, and no one knows who did it. So it's 30 years later. He returns home, and not long after, he starts seeing signs of Billy's presence around the cul-de-sac where they live in the backyard of his house where he vanished. And so it becomes, did Billy return? Is it his ghost? Is it someone playing a trick? And it's so like this man has to sort of like delve into what happened 30 years ago and figured out like what really happened to his best friend.
This is your first Riley Sager novel, then, from a male point of view, or at least in terms of the protagonist.
Yes and no. Home Before Dark, half of it was narrated by a
Yeah,
man. There was a book within a book aspect,
yeah.
and so like the book within the book was narrated by a man. But technically, I guess yes.
Okay.
And I know it's going to come up like in every interview I do and every tour stop I do. Why? And I think some people might not believe me, but like I never set out to write just about female protagonists. It's always been, who do I think is the best person to tell this story?
Yeah,
And in this
absolutely.
case, I really thought like this is best told by a man haunted by what happened 30 years ago. And it's a story, it's about boyhood and friendship and the past possibly literally haunting him. And so like I didn't even give it a second thought. I was like, yep, this needs to be told by this guy.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, you have to let the story, basically tell itself and how it wants to be told. So, yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. Okay, perfect. So that comes out June.
June
When comes out?
18th. Yeah.
June 18th. So that's going to be here before we know it. Where can people find you online? Is there a place that you would say is the best to try to connect online on social media?
RileySagerBooks.com is my website. And at the very top are just little buttons to my Instagram and my Facebook.
Awesome. Well, again, Riley, thanks so much for hanging out. Congratulations on all the success, and I'm sure it's going to continue because every single one of your Riley Sager books was a Book of the Month Club pick, correct?
Or either a pick or an add-on or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. So, all right, everybody, go check out Riley's books if you haven't already. I imagine at this point, everyone has to. Everyone in the world probably has to have read at least one of your books. It feels like so.
There are family members who have not read all of my any of my books, so
That's usually how it is. That's usually
it
how it is.
keeps me
So,
humble. Yes.
all right. Well, again, thanks, Riley, and everybody.
Thank you
We'll
so
see you next
much.
time. Bye.
Thanks. Have a good